All right. Hi, guys. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the next online session powered by Pipedrive and Startup Grind Prague. Please, if you have any questions regarding remote work, ask them on Slido. That's sli.do with the code SDP, Sierra Delta Papa. Yes, I did look it up before the show. So sli.do/SDP for questions. And we will try to answer them during the panel. I will try to incorporate them into the main show as we have the panelists answering questions. Now, let me introduce panelists first. Let's switch over to Tomáš. Tomáš, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Tomáš Řehoř, and I'm currently leading the development team in Pipedrive's Prague office. Before that, I was working for a really long time at Skype/Microsoft, where I have gained a lot of experience working remotely with people between different offices. First, working from Europe with teams in the US. Then I lived in the US for a while, and I experienced the other way around. There is a big difference depending on which time zone you are. And after that, I had a full remote experience when I was working for a company called TopTal, which is organizing remote workers around the world. And that was truly amazing. I think that was the time when I fully understood what the remote work is and how it should be done. And after that, I ended up in Pipedrive, where we have 8 different offices. So a lot of remote work again. And now we are in the situation all together where everybody is remote.
Thank you, Tomáš. Martin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Of course. Hello, everybody. My name is Martin Cízler, and I'm currently with Omio, which is a travel tech startup, a Berlin-based startup with an office in Prague. And my job is to actually lead the office in Prague, and also I work as a director of engineering for a tribe that is responsible for integrating transportation providers into the company. I have a Microsoft past as well, the same as Tomáš. We actually used to work together in the past at Skype. So we used to build the communication tools. Now we are using them in this crazy situation. And yeah, looking forward to this chat.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Daniel, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Daniel Hejl. I'm co-founder and CTO of company Productboard. It's a tech startup with offices in Prague, San Francisco, Vancouver, London. And we have around 170 people right now. Previously, I worked for a couple of startups in Prague and San Francisco, and I've done fully remote work as well for quite a bit.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And finally, let me introduce myself. My name is Jakub Nesetril. I previously also ran a tech startup called Apiary, and now I run a nonprofit called Cesko.Digital. In Apiary, we had offices in Prague and San Francisco, and in Cesko.Digital, we are fully remote only. Thank you guys for joining me. I'm really looking forward to this. And first off, I'll kick it off with the question that everybody wants to hear, because as we're all sitting at home and suffering, everybody wants to know how you're suffering as well. So what changed in the last 2 weeks for you? And I'll probably start off with Tomáš.
Actually, from a work perspective, not that much has changed. We, as a company that is distributed between 8 different offices, we do a lot of remote work already. So we had a lot of best practices in place. What has changed was that now everybody was kind of grounded at home, regardless if their working conditions supported or not. So I would say that this is the biggest change we have experienced, and now we have to deal with it. Like everybody needs to find first their inner peace, which is sometimes hard with kids at home, and then figure out how to manage work during this time. So I would say not much. But since everybody has different working conditions, they would probably tell you a different story.
So you're the embodiment of the stereotype joke that's running around the internet now, that the programmer before pandemic sits in front of the keyboard and codes, and programmer after pandemic sits in front of the keyboard and codes, and there's basically no difference.
Yes, that, and now that there are only two people in the world, those with kids and those without.
Yes, yes. Daniel, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I would say for Beach, quite a lot of things changed. I had to change completely my travel plans. I was supposed to be in San Francisco around this time. I'm in Prague right now instead. I was, we plan to do a lot of meetups, a lot of community events. Now we do just some of them that are online. My day-to-day work changed a lot. We are trying to figure out financially how this crisis will affect the market and whether we should adjust maybe our product strategy, maybe our hiring strategy. And then, like in my personal life, even though I worked remotely or I worked with distributed teams, I had some habits that I had to change completely. For example, going for a workout to a gym is no longer possible, so I had to adjust for that as well.
Did you have anybody from your company grounded on the other side in San Francisco and trying to be repatriated back home?
No, fortunately, everybody got back safe in time.
Okay, that's good to hear. Martin, you're in a travel startup, so for you, this must be the biggest news.
Sure. A lot of stuff actually changed in the past few weeks. On the personal level, I was actually traveling a lot. Right, we have headquarters at Berlin, and I was going there every week. So I had to completely change my plans as well, and start working more remotely with my team over there and with my peers over there. Also, we have an office in Prague, right? And we had built all these nice rituals that every day we make coffee together and we actually solve puzzles together. And that is now all gone. So in terms of social contact, with the people at work, that's pretty challenging. And on the personal level, we've been prisoners for a couple of weeks, right? Like we can barely go out. I have an excuse. We have a dog, so I'm walking the dog. That's still good. But kids are home. The school is fully remote, and me and my wife, we need to also spend our time with them, and that is quite unusual. So a lot of change.
And I will remind everybody that's listening on the live stream that we are taking questions at sli.do/SDP, Sierra Delta Papa, apparently. Now, guys, let's dive into the nitty and gritty, into the meat of why we gathered today. What are your personal tricks towards managing remote work? Now, I think remote work can be understood in the sense of, remote as in, I don't have my colleague right next to me. I don't have it in the same office. And then it's actual home office, which is what we're seeing now for all of us in Czech Republic, or at least most of us. So let's explicitly separate it, and let's start out with kind of the basics of what you find is useful for working with remote teams to begin with, when you can't get into contact with them. I, for example, remember, to start the discussion off, very, very vividly, that I had people that I worked with for 2 years in the same office, and I knew them almost better than my partner. I spent so much time with them, and suddenly I moved across the Atlantic to the other side of the world, and due to the fact that I wasn't able to spend time with them informally outside the office, and due to the fact that we had a limited amount of overlap because of time zone issues, suddenly those people became alien to me very, very, very quickly. And it took like 2 or 3 weeks, and we were out of sync. Is there something, is it something that you're finding in your companies when you're working with remote teams? And what are the issues that you're using to overcome that? I can see Tomáš unmuted.
Yes, I think we have similar experience since I moved to San Francisco from Prague. I experienced exactly the same. I tried to fight it at the beginning. I ended up writing really long emails to my friends, which they all enjoyed reading, but almost nobody replied, or they replied with 1-2 sentences to my really, really long email. That was the way how I tried to keep social interaction. But I think today's situation is very different, and it's different because everybody is in the same place. Everybody has the same problems, and you can see that people actually want to interact. They want to be socially active again, or still. So we are doing many things that we used to do in the office, we are doing them remotely. Martin mentioned they were playing games in the office. We are also playing games. We just play them online. We looked up some online collaborative games, and after work, we every day at 5 p.m. we set up a meeting. We call it coffee time, and we just hang out together on Zoom. Every day is a different group of people. We just share what we did every day, and then after this time is over, some people would stay longer and they would play some online games. We played Counter-Strike. We played the game called Drowosaurus, which is a nice, funny game when you are drawing words and others are supposed to guess what it is. So you can cope with it. There are tools already. Just look them up, and I would say that keeping the social contact is probably the hardest thing, especially for programmers. As you said, Jakub, for programmer, nothing much changes. You are still behind the keyboard and you just type your code. And if you have continuous integration, continuous delivery in place, you don't need to interact with other people to even deploy your code. Social interactions are the hardest, and we focus on them primarily.
So just follow-up question, Tomáš, when you're playing online, does that mean that everybody has their headset on and you have the audio and it kind of feels like a shared experience? So do you play with audio enabled?
Yes. That's part of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so professional tool number 1, Counter-Strike. Anybody else wants to join in?
I can go next.
Sure.
So, normally I think travel is an important ingredient of actually building those social connections, right? You go visit the team, or the people gather in one place. They go, have a nice dinner. They get drunk. They socialize or play some sports, right? And the bonding kind of gets created through those interactions. Now that is gone, and what we are trying to do, and that is, in the work life, but also honestly also in the personal life, is to kind of find supplements in the virtual space. So we have a team in Berlin, and they actually did a team party over Google Hangouts. So Friday night, everybody got their own beer and nice colored lights, and they played some music, and apparently it was a lot of fun, and people just enjoy it because they don't have that fulfillment in their normal life now. We do the same with our friends. We have a Friday pub every Friday night, and we just spend time together. So I think that's one aspect. And then the other angle is, when you create that social bond during normal circumstances, then I think you just switch to that day-to-day routine, right? You have stand-ups or some way of syncing, and it kind of works. And I think that what is different now is that there is definitely a need to over-communicate, right? Maybe sync more often, every day, twice a day. They're trying to create opportunities for people to actually meet even informally. Morning coffee, a virtual placeholder for having a lunch together, and it's kind of a pop-in, pop-out, whoever wants to join, so that we create that space for social interactions. There's one drawback, though. My coffee consumption tripled over the past few weeks. So, I'm curious how long I'm going to hold.
Anna, do you want to join in?
Yeah, sure. So I would definitely agree with what Tomáš and Martin said, that if you are now jumping into remote work and trying to figure out what other companies used to do before, this is not a normal situation. And we at Productboard, we relied heavily on travel as well, and we traveled a lot in between San Francisco and Prague, and we wanted to make sure that people meet at least once every 6 weeks, and they can have really deep conversations about the most important topics. And now this is gone, and so we need to figure out different ways how to do that. And I learned that in the remote setup, you cannot just go from the meeting room and talk informally with other people how you were used to do it in the office. And so this suddenly becomes to be more like robotic. You need to really do that within the meeting, and maybe at the beginning of the meeting just spend first 5-10 minutes just talking about normal day-to-day things, how everybody's feeling, and only then jump to very structured, efficient meeting.
So I think the commonality that I'm hearing between the three of you, and it also very resonates with my experience, is that one of the big problems in not being physically present with each other is that you lose the unstructured time. Because sure, body language is important, and being next to each other probably is a more high volume communication than over video. But a lot of the tools have improved, but for communicating, but they don't cover the things that you find out by accident, right? If you need a topic, if you need to discuss deployment issues, if you need to discuss marketing strategy, if you need to discuss cutting costs because of coronavirus, which by the way is one of the questions that we're getting on Slido, sli.do/SDP. So all of those questions you can set up a meeting for, right? But what you can't set up a meeting for is the stuff that you don't know about. And it is essential for forming these connections between people that you talked about so much, is actually spending that time together that doesn't have an agenda. In my company, I scheduled for people that I thought were strategic and their relationships were important. I forced them to have an unstructured meeting. Daniel described something a little bit similar, where you force yourself to have an unstructured part of a perhaps even a group meeting. But it is really essential to allow some of that human connection to seep into the otherwise, here's the agenda, here's the topics, and this is what we're going to run through. So I think that's a commonality that resonated between all three of you, and it's really interesting that you all three mentioned it as your first tip, as your number one priority for remote work. What will be your number two?
I'll start if I may.
Sure.
I think another important thing is to keep your routines, right? Being remote can be challenging. It also comes down to your personality. Somebody is, self-organized to a degree that you can really, make up your time and, be productive. But some people like me, I'm not a very organized person, so I really need to have a routine and some repetition and a schedule so that things work out smooth. And specifically when working with other people, right? Being predictable and knowing that there are certain checkpoints in time when you are actually expected to show up or talk to them and exchange information, to me is critical.
I would maybe add this would be my second tip, but since Martin talked about it, I would probably talk about sense of belonging. When you are suddenly alone at home, it's very easy to find yourself in a situation where you are questioning yourself: why am I even doing this job? Like, is it important? Am I doing the right thing even? So creating the sense of belonging on a company level is even more important in these days, when you just cannot go to the kitchen corner and bump into other people and just do the regular office chit chat, basically figuring out, oh yeah, I like it here because of the people and blah blah. So I think it's necessary to do this consciously on a company level. Kind of make sure that everybody is on the same page, everybody is aware of the situation in the company, especially during these turbulent times when you hear about so many companies cutting costs, laying off. People are necessarily asking, will it affect me? Will it be our situation as well? So it is super important that the company is more transparent than ever and communicates more than ever to all the employees. The way how we are doing it in Pipedrive is that initially we used to have a company update once per month, where the whole company would jump on a call and we would have an update about how the company is doing. Now we're doing it every week. And it's very useful. Situation changes every week, and it's very, very beneficial, and everybody is reflecting it very, very positively. You can also see it from the number of questions. When it's done once per month, most of the people usually already know the news anyway, but when it's done once per week, the attendance is super high, and the questions being asked are very relevant, and people are more engaged. So that would be my second tip, like maintain and increase the sense of belonging.
Do you think the attendance is because of the frequency of the meetings, or is it just because of the turbulent times and people needing that connection? It's a very interesting tip. I mean, I think it rolls into the whole kind of mental health related issues that are also connected with being lonely and being disconnected, right?
Yeah, I think it's the second thing. It's really not that it's once per week that people would hop on the call, but really they want to see what's new, what are other people doing, and how are we standing as a company.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that you heard a lot about this idea of over communication, and now you need to share much more information than before. But at the same time, we should try to avoid a situation where we have just meeting after meeting after meeting because everybody feels that not enough information is shared. And so I would look at it from the perspective of some of the communication channels are high fidelity, they are real time with audio, video, and others are maybe just Slack and Google Docs. And so I would like to, we are trying to use the high fidelity channels like Zoom calls for cases where it's a lot about emotions and this sense of belonging and the social needs of people. And we are trying to move like the just classical information broadcasting to maybe more like an async way of communication through Slack, right? So maybe before, during your all hands, you spend quite a lot of time sharing business metrics, how much like new revenue is there and who are the new customers. But maybe that's something that you can share through email or Slack message as well. And now you can spend more of your like face-to-face time, like real-time communication on the emotional aspects.
So I think you and Tomáš, you both touched on very important topics here. I think Tomáš kind of mentioned the word transparency. You mentioned you kind of dove into the bandwidth of communication and how over communicating can be wasteful with people's time, right? But I think those two are interconnected. That's why I kind of joined them together. Transparency is typically something that's great, but only works for asynchronous channels because although Tomáš just made the point that they're also trying to be transparent on the synchronous channel, on video chat, on having once a week update, right? Do you have any tricks or maybe it's not just one-time trick, but it's really a culture that you practice in your company on how to improve the quality of communication? Because as the bandwidth is narrower, it's a lot easier, for example, on chat and on Slack to misunderstand each other, right? Do you find that forces you to communicate in a different way on that medium than when you're in the office? Okay, I will push this back to Daniel because he was the one that started talking about the bandwidth of communication.
So I think preparation is key, right? So we usually feel very under pressure. During the week, we try to deliver as much work as we can. And now, there is this all hands meeting in front of us. We want to use every last minute before the meeting, just working and then, deliver what, the information you wanted just without any preparation, because that feels like the most efficient for you. But actually this way you are a lot of the times wasting quite a lot of time of all the other people in the company. And so first thing I would really focus on is spending maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes before the meeting, really preparing. So you know what's the story you want to say and how you want to say that.
Martin, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I would maybe go back to to those async channels like Slack, etc. Right? I think sometimes people just expect that people are going to respond immediately when you type something in the chat. You kind of in your subconscious expect an instantaneous answer. But I think it's okay to understand that sometimes that answer is not going to be instantaneous. And luckily, these collaboration tools have things like mentions, channel mentions, year mentions, etc. that can be used quite efficiently. We also have quiet hours, and I think people should just learn to use these little helpers and basically indicate, look, I have my focus time, And at this point, I'm just not going to be bothered by your questions. Call me if you want. And then, the entry to actually have a call is much higher, and some people may just actually not cross it because that thing they really want is not that important, right? So it's also about managing kind of expectations that you want others to have, from your current state, and using the tools that you have available.
I must admit that I have probably forgotten your original question, but I wanted to add something what you said anyway, about what kind of information you share on which kind of channels. I think transparency about, let's say, business metrics is a must today. If you want to keep people engaged, like making the most essential business metrics publicly available to everybody in the company is essential. But what these all hands are super useful for is to give context. Sometimes you're looking at the numbers, you see they are growing, they are maybe going down, but without context, why is that happening? The numbers may be useless, and when they are going up, you may get wrong ideas why they are going up without the context. If they are going down, you may get into, I don't know, depression, or you may feel bad without understanding what's happening as well. So I think the best use of the time when you have 500, 600 people of a company on
And we lost Tomáš. Can Daniel and Martin hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
All right. Well, we have one of the troubles of remote work illustrated live: bandwidth of communication. Okay, let's hope Tomáš recovers, and I think we'll continue. So one thing that I found when I was starting the remote-only work, when I was starting my nonprofit, I tried to study organizations that were remote first. There's this whole topic about being remote first and questions whether you can convert a company that has offices into remote first, or whether it's something that is a one-way street. And I found that I have a feeling that the remote communication is inherently, it's less bandwidth, it's narrower, and so it's less comfortable for people, and they are always prone to jump to that high bandwidth conversation. So they want to go and talk online, they want to talk on video, and ideally they want to talk in person. And I remember one thing that one of the, I think it was, I won't name names now, but I remember that they told me one thing that I remember still to this day. They told me, if we meet and we talk at lunch and we start talking about work, at one point we say, okay, we talked too much and we stop it right now and we'll continue online, because we don't want to have a conversation that other people can't be part of. Do you find that happening as well? That you kind of, that if you have this kind of one-on-one conversation that's high bandwidth, for example, on video, that you have to kind of go back and stop it and continue it on something like Slack when everybody can join in? Is that something that resonates with you?
Well, I would say, if I may, that, sometimes people are really not mindful about that. And you can see it mostly, I would say, in larger companies, right? Where you have, for example, this setup where you have, some central office, and then there is a lot of this informal communication actually naturally happening. And people agree on things in the corridors because it's very quick and natural. And then you, if you are the remote person, actually suffer from it because it's kind of unfair. You don't have that, informal channel or high fidelity channel available. So I think that actually one thing that this crisis can really teach people is maybe that, it's not automatic to have this benefit. And, it's way more actually inclusive to think about people who are remote and who cannot just, meet you halfway somewhere while having a coffee at a coffee machine, right? So I think that's a good lesson.
Does anybody here have colleagues in an office that is not on lockdown at this point?
No.
I guess, yeah, okay.
But I would say another sorry,
Go
if
ahead,
I can jump in, like similar situation, you mentioned like this situation where you might have some of the people from the team are in the office and then few of the team members are outside. And this was one case where this is very tricky for the remote people. Second situation is on a meeting where maybe 3 people are sitting in the same room and then other 2 are connected through Zoom. And for the people that are remote, it might be much harder to jump into the conversation and start speaking, right? Because there is a delay. They cannot show they're interested to speak up. And so this creates a huge imbalance, how much actually different people in the team can provide input and insights. And so that's something to be very mindful about. And I think it's great for everybody to try and experience what is it like to be just a single person that's not in the room, and how hard it actually is to jump in. And so, for example, for this case, we started using in Zoom, for example, the chat, or there's this feature of raise hand. So it's super easy for the person that's on a call just to say that they want to say something, and it's something that we are monitoring, and then give the room for the people to speak up as well.
Yeah, when we had our first big remote meeting, every Tuesday we have this event which is called Pitching Tuesday, where new missions or projects are being pitched to the entire company. When we had for the first time everybody fully remote, the organizer was apologizing to everybody for the poor experience, and she didn't understand that for people remotely. She was saying that from the perspective of a person who is in the headquarters, who always has the full auditorium in front of her that is uploading, and that gives her immediate feedback. Now she didn't have that, and she said that it was poor experience, but it was only for this one office that is kind of the central office. All the other offices actually better experience, because now everybody was on the same level. When we were asking questions, everybody was very well heard. So I would agree with Martin that it is very good time and opportunity for everybody to understand what a good remote meeting is. And I think so far it's working out. The only thing we haven't sorted out yet, we are also using this raise hand feature in Zoom, but the only thing we haven't figured out yet is applause. Since most of our company all hands are happening from some auditoriums, when the speaker ends, there is usually applause. And now we don't have it, and Zoom doesn't have any such feature for these big meetings. So we are experimenting with some mobile apps. So the speaker would turn on applause on their mobile phone and put it in front of the microphone. So that was the best thing we could figure out so far. So if anybody in the audience knows some better way how to do it, please put it on Slido.
We usually have the Zoom chat full of emojis in this case.
And I will now divulge a company secret from Daniel's company, which one of my employees stole from his company and implemented in my company as well. And I think it's very relevant to this situation. I think what both of you are saying is communicating emotion, right? Which is, it's not about communicating the facts, but also that kind of human connection and emotion around it. And I love how Slack has all those emojis implemented underneath all the messages, and we profusely use emojis under messages to show I've read this, I'm excited about it. But more so, and I think that's one very nice trick that we copied from Productboard. You guys have a Slack channel called Feeling Love, right?
Yeah.
True, Daniel? Yeah.
I
love that. And I think it speaks to that what Tomáš was talking about as well. It's like you need the connection to the company, and you need stuff to be excited about, not just I will continue to be employed and I'm not about to be made redundant, but things to be excited about and proud about. And sharing those online is much harder than when you all go out for lunch and you tell each other excitedly about all the new stuff that you've been working on that you're proud of. And so, putting a place online where people can go to find out what other people are proud of, I think is a great touch. So we're coming up at roughly half of our discussion. And I wanted to make sure that, first of all, we flip over to the second half and talk a little bit about stuff that's specific to the current pandemic. This isn't a normal business as usual situation, right? We've covered some of the typical remote work that's normal for everyday situations, but now everybody's at home and everybody's grounded, everybody's isolated, and moreover, everybody has their personal life protruding into their work life. How have you found that the current situation is different for you? And I mean, we've talked a little bit about that, but what are the tools that you're using to cope with the situation now?
I would say that the first thing we use is not a tool, it's actually empathy and the way how we start meetings. If you are in a typical office environment, when you start meeting that is scheduled, we have half an hour, you go right to the point. You talk chit chat after, maybe when you have time, you leave it after the meeting. But now in these conditions, almost all the meetings start with how are you doing? How are your kids? Do you have enough time to rest? Have you been outside? Have you been doing any sports? Like basically social interaction. This is how we start the meeting. And it's not only, and it's natural. It's not that we would say now everybody starts meeting with some pleasantries. But it actually shows empathy and it connects people. And then when you are talking business, it's different than when you are in the office. It's more compassionate, I would say. It's you see much less fights or much less argument. I don't mean fights as people will be furiously shouting at each other, but arguments about each other's opinions. Now everybody is trying to understand the other person's position before they actually go and defend themselves. So I would say this is the best tool that this crisis has given us. That everybody is struggling in some way, so they are more open to feel be more empathetic and feel the pain of the others as well.
I would elaborate on what Tomáš said. That is totally true. I think what also works or is necessary to actually show your own vulnerability, right? Especially when you manage people and you work with people. Sometimes just when you ask, how are you? Like that's a rhetorical question. Nobody's really gonna think that you mean it. But when you talk about your own personal struggles, that you have anxiety or you are stressed out about a situation, first it's true, right? And you are actually honest about it, and it makes you more approachable. It makes you more human. So I think that is something that works for us as well.
So I would, it's interesting from the point of manager or like management, right? Because management already is hard, right? And there might be quite a lot of people that are doing it maybe for the first time. And suddenly you are in this remote setup, maybe for the first time, and you have to lead a fully distributed team for the first time. And at the same time, we are, in a crisis. And for most people, that's for the first time as well. And suddenly you have to deal with many more potential issues, right? People might have different emotional states and potentially even mental health situations even before the crisis. And suddenly they are not able to do things they usually done to cope with that. They're not able to go outside. They're not able to do a workout. And they might feel threatened by the health crisis, or you might have a person in your home, in your family that have some like immunity problem, and they are really afraid about their health. And so suddenly there is many more things that will popping up, and that's really hard. And so one thing, of course, vulnerability is super important, but at the same time you need to show that the company is okay. If the company is okay, in our case, yes, we are a bit affected by the crisis, but we'll be fine, and we will move forward. And so you need to show your people that you have a plan how to deal with the whole situation. They don't have to worry about their job, and so that's the first thing. And the second thing is, of course, people had some goals and ambitions for themselves that set before the crisis. And it might be hard to hit them now because the time is not as productive as before. If you were planning to, I don't know, like it's for most of the companies that are using OKRs, now is the time for Q2 planning. It's the same case in Productboard, and suddenly it might be much harder because you cannot get everybody in the same room, and so it might take much longer than you were hoping to get it done. And so people might feel pressured by trying to hit the goal they originally set for themselves before the crisis. So I think this is a lot about the conversations during one-on-one to figure this out and figure out who is struggling and making sure they are not under pressure.
So Daniele, back to you. There's a question on Slido. Reminder for those who just joined us: sli.do/sdp. And there's a question that I think is related to what you were just talking about, to the insecurity, to the risks, to the feeling of being threatened by the current crisis. And it's, what type of costs have you cut in your company as a result of the pandemic right now, and how does that impact the current remote work situation and the teams that you're leading?
So we haven't cut any costs yet. But we are trying to do a new financial planning and really model different scenarios, because at this point it's really impossible to tell what will happen, right? Like we are not only for the most affected industries like travel and hospitality, but will be still affected in some way. And at this point it's impossible to say how much. And so we are just going through exercise where we are putting together different financial models, and based on how we'll be learning, about the impact over the next weeks, we'll adjust. But so far, it looks like just potentially slowing the hiring, but we'll see.
Any other experiences from other companies? I know we're mostly IT here, so I'm afraid that the answer is not going to be representative for the rest of society.
Well, we are travel tech, right? So it's kind of, it's related to one of the, I would say mostly most hit industries. And, clearly that has reflected on our business in a way, right? We are seeing, decline in business because nobody can travel. So we basically set some principles for ourselves, and we said, look, we don't want to impact our employees, right? As long as possible, as much as possible, because that really is the key asset to the company, right? The people, the brain power, the talent. So there are some, like natural savings, like we are not going to work, right? So in the office, it doesn't make sense to actually purchase catering and stuff, perks that we used to have, because there's nobody to use them anyway. And then another important part where we are actually focusing on being more mindful about how do we spend is our cloud cost. We run in Google Cloud, so the infrastructure is all virtualized. So we have actually, invested into investigations and projects to optimize our cloud spending. We are reassessing whether we use storage wisely, how long do we cache things, do we really need to, scale that much as we did before and stuff like it. And from there, it comes actually, the majority of savings comes.
I was unmuted. I would just add that it's very, very similar story to what Daniel has said. We are just trying to be cautious and plan for the unplannable. Trying to lay out multiple scenarios. And then as the world will unveil itself, we will just keep adopting those scenarios that are happening in the world. Just keeping the cost sensible and making sure that we are ready, whatever will come.
So one thing that's specific for all three of you here is that you work for startups. Startups can be fast-paced. And one question here is, clear product plans are always important, even more in remote setup. Have you experienced that changing requirements makes it much harder for a remote team? Now, I don't want to anticipate, but I can imagine that being in a startup, you do experience your share of changing requirements from time to time. Do you find that being more difficult to deal with now that you're distributed? And I'll connect it with the second question, just to connect those two together. How do you make sure that you don't overwhelm your employees with online content? So one, changing goalposts and requirements, and how do you deal with that? And two, how don't you overwhelm people with content?
I can start this time. I think it's important that there is a trend that or maybe not necessarily a trend, but one place, one voice that is speaking for the company. Of course, priorities have changed. I don't remember what were our priorities 3 weeks ago. The world has changed. We have changed our priorities, and we are trying to adapt heavily. What is important is that there is this one way of telling the company what the priorities are. And we have this weekly company meeting now. So this is the main channel where everybody hears about the changes and the priorities. Then, of course, we use other channels. Each tribe has their own product lead or engineering manager, and they are distributing the message further. But it's important that the single source of truth is still there, which is the CEO and this company meeting. And then individual tribes may use different language. What we have understood is that what the CEO will say, and some people might understand it, all the other people will understand it in a completely different way. So we are making sure that, for instance, when we are talking to developers, we use the language that developers understand, which is typically more straightforward, less fluffy words. So that I think is essential. How to cope with the changes. Make sure that everybody knows that there has been a change, and what are the changes. What is the new priority?
Nobody else comes forward. I think one thing that I wanted to push back on you is if you're communicating from a single source of truth and you're making sure that everybody hears a single voice, that can be it can be very wasteful in the sense that either everybody tunes in to listen to the CEO, and then it's a lot of time spent, even for some people that don't actually understand him, as Tomáš said. And if they don't tune in, and then they might not possibly get the single message because they're not, I understand that you want to have a single source of truth if you're changing quickly so that there's no kind of disagreement around it. But I want to push back on the how do you not overwhelm people with just tons of meetings and back-to-back meetings because everybody wants to over-communicate. We already talked about that a little bit before, right?
I think this particular question has been partially already answered by what I was saying. If you have this one meeting to communicate the direction or the priorities, then that's just one meeting to follow every week. And as we said before, people naturally want to follow this meeting because there is a lot of relevant information for them every week. But then you have another meeting to translate it to the developers, right? Or like to translate to the individual tribes. So does everybody tune in to the all company meeting, or is it just like the first level managers and then they translate it down on their individual meetings? Everybody tunes in there, but the questions typically are, what did they mean? How should I understand it? How does it affect me? That's the end ultimate question. How does it affect me? And this is where a lot of other different meetings and communications happen, because it affects different people in a different way. And this is a job of also the tribe leads, either on the engineering side or on the product side, to actually understand what does it mean for them, for our tribe, and how to communicate it further inside the team. So there is some communicational overhead, but most of the tribes, they have this cadence of plannings and pitching and updates anyway. So it's just another use of these already planned meetings.
Well, I would say that there is also different granularity to different communication coming from different people, right? If you are listening to a CEO, that's probably not going to be a 1 hour long talk about details. It's going to be probably some high level message, 20 minutes, something that is punchy, and everybody is kind of going to get an understanding what is the direction in which we are now going. But then, figuring out the details really comes down to the next level of leadership. And the clarity and granularity of information increases the lower you go in the structure. So I don't actually think that is a problem if you don't really communicate stuff that you are not supposed to communicate on that given level.
Got it. Okay. I got worried that you froze, but it was good. So, Dan, you want to chime in as well before I move into
I think it's, yeah, sure. In our case, it's very similar what Martin and Tomáš said. It's really about, granularity and then empowerment, right? It's, from, the leadership of the company, there's just, high level product strategy that comes down. And then it's up to every team or every tribe to figure out, within this direction, which goals they want to set for themselves and how they want to measure, the success. And that's something we do just every 3 months, right, on the quarterly basis. And so that's not too much information sharing, and that's not too often. And you very rarely change the direction in between, right? Maybe now with the crisis, yes, that's a reason why to rethink everything. But usually that's every 3 months. And, when the direction makes sense and the metrics make sense, it's up to the team to figure out what to do on week-to-week basis.
So I've got a new topic here. We've got about last 10 minutes or so, 10, 15. If you want to add some last questions, I'm not just going through the order of votes. I'm picking the ones that I find most interesting. Feel free to add the last questions. sli.do/sdp. Now, here's one thing that usually people prefer to do in person. And with the current crisis, you can't. Has anybody here hired or fired or onboarded people remotely? And how did you deal with that?
So we hired and onboarded people during past 3 weeks. It's much harder, especially for some of the people that are still locked down, maybe in London or in other parts. So it was maybe the hardest was how to ship them hardware. So that was quite tricky. But then we had to do everything remotely through Zoom calls, and we had to schedule all the meetings we normally do through Zoom calls. But in our case so far it works quite well. But it was just first 3 weeks, so we'll see how it goes later.
Apart from shipping hardware, any other difficulties? Tomáš, you go for it.
Oh, I thought it was a question to Daniel. We haven't onboarded anyone yet remotely here in Prague, but I have experience with it previously. This is probably the most difficult part. You can hire people remotely. It's natural today to have hiring interviews over a call. Onboarding is the part if you are a company that normally sits in the office. That's where on the first day you want the person to get a feeling of the company, feeling of the culture, meet as many people as possible, and make it really nice, important day. So doing that remotely, I think you need to pick. You need to completely change your onboarding routine. Forget about spending the whole day on call. First day on call, just on different Zoom calls, seeing different presentations. You have to pick the essence. Pick the essence of what do you want this person to experience on their first day, and what do they want to remember, and then just give it to them piece by piece. So I would say what works the best is a combination of a call and then letting the person to sink in the information and maybe do something themselves. So kind of this on and off approach where you actually have chance to be with yourself and accept what's happening with you. But of course, this is very different than the typical first day or even first week.
I have experience from my past, right, when we actually did both. It's not great. Onboarding people definitely, it's not easy, and it also depends on them and their willingness to really, go across, maybe outside a little bit of a comfort zone and maybe spend a little bit more time online. But then it was in a situation that was quite regular. They could travel. So they, after a week or two, they actually came for a few days. So now we didn't. We actually decided even to postpone some onboarding because it was too difficult to actually do, given the travel bans and visa situations that are not straightforward. So, yeah.
All right. Before we wrap up, I want to move to one more topic, which I think is more personal. Over the last 2 weeks, when we were preparing for this, I told you guys before, over the last 2 weeks, I've had a lot of group calls on Zoom and Skype and Google Meet and everything. And this is so far the first meeting out of all of those in the last 2 weeks where no baby has popped up in the video. How do you deal with integrating your personal life and your work life, which suddenly have somehow merged? So first of all, how do you let that personal life seep into your work life? And is this something that is a big no-no, or how do you integrate it? But also, how do you keep yourself, focused and mentally healthy in the context where you have that blurry line and no clear separation?
I'll maybe start. So, we already mentioned the morning routine, and I think it's quite key for me. I heard once this saying that, it's the best when your office is about 15 minutes of walk from your home. Actually, like not less, right? You need to have some time where you can kind of change your mindset and stop thinking about your personal things and start thinking about your work things, and then vice versa as you go back home. And for me, I usually relied on even going for a workout in the morning to a gym and then to grab a coffee and then go to the office. And that's something that I felt that I'm missing and had to incorporate again in my routine now. So I had to change quite a lot of things and start doing workouts at home, and then maybe go for a little walk around the block, around the river for like 10 minutes, so I can feel the fresh air in the morning, even if it's through the mask and everything. But still, that's something that helps me a lot to get started in the morning.
I think this is during the last 2 weeks, this has been the most important thing in our work lives. How a company can cope with that. You were actually mentioning it, Jakub, before the call. I'm gonna say it here. Like, don't be that guy on BBC when the kid came into the room and he was like pushing it away or under the table. I don't remember exactly what he was doing, but he actually tried to pretend the kid is not there. So I think that this is the worst kind of response what a company can do these days. And we have every day we have all kinds of different situations. Everybody has different working conditions, and I think that's quickly became the most important part of anyone's workday. To first make yourself healthy from the mental perspective, like the mental hygiene. Prioritize yourself, and the works go second. Because if you are not good, feeling good yourself, how can you do good work? So I have seen everything. I have seen a person admitting in a public channel, guys, I'm only able to work 3 hours today because my wife has more important meetings, and we simply have to take turns into taking care of the kids. And this is super kind of brave that he transparently admitted it. And at the same time, it is super cool that the company, and by company I mean the people in the audience, they accepted it and said, yeah, this is the situation now. We have to deal with this. I have another colleague who is living in a 55 square meters apartment, and she is there with 2 kids. I cannot expect from her to be working 8 hours a day. It's simply not possible. So we just came up with some arrangements. How can she do at least let's say mandatory work she needs to do, while keeping sane by having time to be with her kids. So I think long answer, but the message is simple. Make this a priority. Make it a priority that people are able to work with their kids, even if it means that they will be having meetings with 2 kids on their laps. This has to be the priority right now.
Same here. I would say be human, right? Because people have different conditions, different family situation. Now with the school situation, they need to actually help their kids also, succeed. So what works for us really is to be, mindful of these needs, and people are trying not to schedule meetings over lunches because people need to cook, or actually they want to eat with their family. It's okay to have kids just running around and everybody's actually just waving at them. I think it's kind of natural. So the tolerance, the respect, and kind of being human is the best we can all do.
So over the last couple of weeks, running a nonprofit, I've seen a huge amount of volunteer activity rising up over the last couple of weeks, and I on one level, it's great that we're all united and we're responding together to this crisis, and we're bonding together and holding together much stronger. And I'm really hoping that today's session also helped other people hold more firmly together and kind of survive this in their own companies. It's also clear to see that it's kind of a panic response, that there is like a psychological response wave, and initially people are very tense and agitated, and slowly things are starting to settle into a longer term norm. And I think I've read recently a very nice article that said that one of the things that you should really be careful about when you're working 200% now, as many of us do, because we have this response to the crisis, and we want to work very hard to overcome it. And one thing that we should be very careful for is not to try to work very hard to overcome it so that it comes back to normal, because it will never come back to normal, in the sense that the world has changed and has probably changed through this crisis. And when we come out of it, it's going to be a slightly different world. I think thanks to this, we can see it as an opportunity, not just as a problem. We can see it as an opportunity to learn how to work remotely better, how to be more empathetic towards each other, how to be more human, how to incorporate that into the company life. And we can also learn how to connect our work lives and our private lives. And I firmly believe that when we come out of this, there will be a much higher percentage of remote work and working from home scenarios, because we've all had this shock treatment of learning it. Thank you so much, guys, for joining. It was really nice to talk to you. Thank you for everybody remotely who tuned in and listened with us and asked questions online. And with that, I have to go and put my kids to bed. So I wish you all a very nice evening.
Thanks as well.
Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
Good evening. Ciao.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Bye.
Good evening, guys.
I get up, I get up, can't deny it.